Hi, welcome to EC&M Ask video. This is just a series of short videos where we try to answer some of our readers and viewers' questions from webinars and articles and so forth. And hopefully in this little short and sweet time frame, we'll be able to give you the information that you need. So anyway, today's question is on NFPA 70B. And somebody says, what's in the new NFPA 70B? And I think this is a really good part of the question that says, who's going to enforce it? Oh, okay, so we can talk about that a little bit. So anyway, let's see if we can cover that information here rather quickly. Now, the new NFPA 70B, what they're talking about is the NFPA 70B has always been the recommended practice for electrical equipment maintenance. Recommendations, that's great. You can give me some recommendations. I may or may not follow them, right? But this year in 2023, the NFPA 70B changed. It's no longer a recommended practice. It's now the NFPA 70B standard for electrical equipment maintenance. So it's a standard now. I must comply with it? Well, let's check and see here in just a second, okay? So maybe the first part is, well, what's in this NFPA 70B? Heck, there's 38 chapters, 13 informative indexes, over 200 pages. Lots of information, maybe is the quickest answer for you. But in reality, let's talk about a little bit about those chapters so we don't get blown away by all this context. The first 6 chapters, administrative type information, okay? So for instance, chapter 3 is definitions. Chapter 5 is personnel safety. Oh, that must be huge. No, it's just a sentence or so. And it says go to NFPA 70E if you want to know about electrical safety. All right. Chapter 4, I think, is important. I want to point out a couple of things in chapter 4. So now chapter 4 says you shall have a written electrical maintenance program. And it actually lists, I believe, it's 7 items that program must contain. We'll take a quick look at that, in fact. And the whole idea then going from a recommended practice to a standard is that the language changes on the inside where it can become enforceable. So when something says you shall do it, that's pretty straightforward, right? So let's take a look at just a little bit of information then out of chapter 4 and tell you what, according to the 70B standard, you must comply with. It says that electrical equipment shall be maintained in accordance with what? Manufacturer's instructions. And if you don't have the manufacturer's instructions, so you use the applicable codes and standards from industry. And what kind of standard would you want to use? An ANSI approved standard. So the NFPA 70B is an ANSI approved standard then. Now, also in chapter 4, it tells us what we must have in our electrical maintenance program. It says the owner shall implement and document an electrical maintenance program. It says you've got to talk about inspection of equipment in your program. It says you have to talk about the conditions of maintenance. You must address that, in other words. How often are you going to do maintenance and on what pieces of equipment and so forth? It has to cover the principles and controls of your electrical maintenance program. And the whole idea behind NFPA 70B is safety. Okay, and we'll talk about that when we get into the enforcement of it. Now, it says, what else? Oh, I have to investigate incidents. We already see that in 70E. And I have to audit my electrical maintenance program then periodically and make sure it's working for me, righty? Then the next 2 chapters, so that's the first, really out of the first 6 chapters, administrative stuff and single line diagrams. The next 2 chapters, 7 and 8, talk about testing. And they talk about, chapter 7 talks about fundamental tests that apply throughout the NFPA 70B standard. And then chapter 8 talks about things like, well, how often should you do these tests? And qualified people have to do the testing, right? Yeah, it says all of that. So it helps us to determine what equipment we should be doing testing, our maintenance and testing on, how often we should do it, and what types of tests we should be running then. And then the remaining chapters, all the way up through chapters, actually 36, is specific pieces of equipment. So rotating equipment like motors and generators, circuit breakers, cables, and all of that are covered in these remaining chapters. And they give me the specifics on the types of maintenance that I have to do on this equipment then. And then the informative annexes A through M, they're all there for informational purposes, but lots of good information that we can go to help us set up and implement our program, right? So in a nutshell, to answer that first part of that question, there's a lot of information. It's completely rewritten from the previous editions of NFPA 70E. Lots of different information, and it's all put into this wording of you shall not, may be permitted to, all of those type of things. The same things that we see in the NEC, right? And so anyway, the second part of the question is interesting. How are we going to enforce that? Who enforces that? Well, think of NFPA 70E, our electrical safety standard. Now, it's pretty obvious on the National Electrical Code because the electrical code is a code and it's adopted as law within various jurisdictions, and our AHJ enforces the code, right? We understand that. But when it comes to a standard, look at the NFPA 70E standard. How is that enforced? Through OSHA regulations is what we're concerned about. We always want to comply with OSHA because that is the law. OSHA has a general duty clause. And in that general duty clause, it basically says, hey, the employer has to supply you with a workplace that is essentially free from hazards and so on. You have responsibilities as well, and some general information. So how we've seen in references to 70E written in citations, if you think about it, it's pretty much just like we're going to see in 70B. Hopefully incidents don't happen. But if they do, they're going to come to the employer and they're going to say, look, this incident happened and that was a bad thing. And there is an ANSI approved standard out there that had you followed that ANSI approved standard, there's a good chance that incident would not have happened and that employee would not have been injured. So, Mr. Employer, you didn't maintain your equipment, and what happened is somebody got hurt on it. And there's an ANSI approved standard out there that tells you how to maintain your equipment, and you chose not to follow it. Well, I think you've got some liability then, don't you? So I think that's what we're going to see, I'm sure, as far as 70B then and how it's enforced. So anyway, that's a good little introduction, I guess, to 70B and maybe some of the things to start thinking about on enforcement. But we're done for the day with this little last video. We got to keep them short and sweet. Once again, I'm Randy Barnett. Thank you for listening in on this EC&M Ask video. Remember, it's brought to you by EC&M Magazine, which is part of the Endeavor Business Portfolio of publications. And most importantly, work safe until our next video. Thanks.